For many Japanese civilians, the first nights when the new raids arrived felt like a subtle rewriting of daily life. Ordinary evenings hardened by rationing became marked by a sound so different that it demanded attention, a low, sustained propulsion that rolled across the sky and refused to be ignored. People climbed to rooftops and leaned from eaves to locate that sound. Instead of a single shape, they found a presence in the sky, an occupied horizon. Diaries later call it an atmosphere of occupation rather than the sight of a single monstrous silhouette. Mothers wrapped children and listened for engines with a new ear. Shopkeepers shuddered, not from fear of shrapnel but from a continuous reach above them. The sense was not immediate panic, but a slow reconfiguration of what safety meant at dusk. In small neighborhoods, conversations turned to a new vocabulary: persistent sky, endless hum, the unfamiliar drum. That vocabulary marked how ordinary people began to map danger not by proximity to fronts, but by the new persistence of air attack. Pilots and radar crews reported a different problem: tracks that stretched and returned, formations that held altitude longer than expected. Interceptors trained for short engagements found their profiles mismatched against this new scale of threat. Japanese anti-aircraft batteries produced dramatic tracer columns and searchlight webs that looked impressive, but often could not alter bomber streams. The theater of defense shifted from a fight of kills to a problem of attrition against resilient formations. In operations rooms, officers pored over maps and telegrams, their tone changing from tactical confidence to haunted pragmatism. Their notes reveal not disarray, but a professional, grimed understanding that doctrines had to change. Survivor letters emphasize the sonic difference, the long propulsion, the sustained engine voice that signaled not a single raid but a continuing event. These small testimonies cumulatively formed a new national sense of vulnerability. Only after this human reaction did technicians and historians name the cause: the Boeing B-29 Superfortress, an aircraft designed to cross vast oceanic distances, to sustain long missions at altitudes, and to carry unprecedented payloads for its time. The B-29's pressurized cabin was revolutionary. Crews could operate for long periods in a sealed environment, reducing fatigue and improving operational consistency on missions lasting many hours over open ocean. Remote-controlled turrets changed defensive gunnery into a systems problem. Electromechanical fire control centralized targeting, giving coordinated defensive coverage that outmatched many earlier manual arrangements. The R-3350 radial engines, when functioning correctly, delivered power that extended range and payload. Their raw output allowed a bomber to carry far more than preceding heavy aircraft and to travel farther without immediate refueling. Yet the early B-29 was not flawless. Engines overheated, components failed, and accidents in testing exposed the danger of deploying an ambitious design under wartime tempo. Those failures forced fast iteration. Boeing, Bell, and Martin expanded factories and production capacity, while General Hap Arnold intervened to speed fixes and accept modifications in service to avoid waiting months for redesigns. Field mechanics and flight crews became part of the engineering loop. Debriefs from the front informed factory solutions. Mechanics improvised fixes in canvas hangars, turning theory into practiced reliability. Logistics were decisive. Supplying forward bases in China and India required flying over the hump, a perilous Himalayan corridor where weather and altitude punished machines, crews, and schedules. Every gallon of fuel and every spare part on those forward platforms was a costly, weather-risked achievement. Sustaining bomber wings across oceans demanded a choreography of refueling flights, depots, and ground teams. Japanese planners perceived not only machines overhead, but a visible supply chain at work. The sight of repeated, sustained missions conveyed a nation's ability to marshal resources across vast distances. Tactics evolved. High-altitude precision, hampered by jet stream winds, proved less effective than hoped. Released ordnance drifted unpredictably, undermining previously precise calculations. General Curtis LeMay's decision to pivot to low-altitude nighttime incendiary attacks reflected a grim calculus: change altitude and timing to exploit a structural vulnerability in Japanese urban construction. Japanese cities with wooden frames and paper interiors were not built to resist widespread firestorms. Incendiary tactics, optimized for that vulnerability, turned small blazes into cascading conflagrations. Operation Meeting House on March 10, 1945, demonstrated the horrific efficiency of the new doctrine. Hundreds of bombers, coordinated in waves, created ignition points that merged into one vast firestorm. Survivor accounts describe horizons glowing orange and embers drifting like raining confetti. The civil testimony collected after that night gives a human ledger to the tactical calculations made in distant command rooms. Technical admiration for the B-29 sits beside moral clarity. Admiration for engineering, sorrow for consequences. The two feelings must coexist. One does not erase the other. Project Silverplate adapted the Superfortress for atomic delivery. Aircraft were modified, crews trained, and missions executed with a surgical precision that required secrecy and engineering rigor. Enola Gay and Boxcar are names that mark the aircraft's operational apex in delivering nuclear weapons. The technical choreography involved in those missions reflected industrial science translated into decisive operational capability. The aftermath of atomic delivery reshaped geopolitics and confirmed the bomber's symbolic reach. For many Japanese observers, the Superfortress had become the final manifestation of a power that could end wars in a flash. Post-war, the B-29 flew in Korea against a different aerial environment. The arrival of jet fighters such as the MiG-15 shifted the risk calculus and presaged the next era of aerial technology. The Soviet Tu-4 is a story of imitation. Captured and interned B-29s enabled engineers to recreate a near copy, signaling the Superfortress's design importance and the rapid spread of technical knowledge. Museums preserve a handful of B-29s. Standing beneath one, visitors can trace rivets and seams and palpably sense both human skill and the weight of historical consequence. Detailed technical features matter to enthusiasts. Wings sized for range and lift, fuel tanks scaled for distance, and a structural frame built to carry payloads approaching 9 tons on long sorties. The R-33-50's thermal management demanded new baffle designs and cowlings. Engineers shifted practices incrementally to tame heat flux and prevent catastrophic failures during missions. Remote turret systems required synchronized power, hydraulics, and fire control calculation. They represented a shift from manual to systems-level defensive thinking in bomber design. American industry learned fast to integrate feedback. Mechanic reports informed redesigns. Assembly plants altered workflows. Pilots helped prioritize immediate field fixes over theoretical designs. The hump airlift's human narrative is sobering. Crews flying round the clock, engines icing, weather turning routes into tests of endurance, and every successful delivery directly enabling another sortie. Japanese fighter pilots reported an uncanny scale of formations. They described not only size, but a persistence and discipline that confused traditional intercept doctrines. Commanders noted how attrition was unsatisfactory as a strategy. Destroying a handful of bombers did not halt waves that were backed by industrial depth and logistical redundancy. Field reports record frustration, tracers marking the sky, fires and alarms below, and a sense that the attacker could absorb losses and continue operations at scale. The human archive includes maintenance officers who wrote of cannibalizing parts, inventing heat shields and reworking carburetors to keep engines alive over long missions. These micro-stories underscore a system. Bomber technology plus logistics plus human ingenuity combined to produce an effect that enemies recognized and feared. Across conflict theaters, reactions to the B-29 varied, but shared a common thread: surprise at reach, respect for engineering, and a dawning fear at the strategic consequences. Intelligence reports picked up a pattern. When technology leaps beyond expectations, morale and doctrine shift faster than hardware can be countered. The B-29's presence also forced doctrinal adaptation within Japan, reallocating fighters, changing patrol patterns, and reconsidering the placement of anti-aircraft resources. These reallocations strained resources and revealed a strategic squeeze. Defending many dispersed urban centers against a sustained long-range bomber is costly and reactive. On a human level, letters show people trying simple acts to reclaim routine: closing shops earlier, community watches, and rituals of mutual warning, which proved psychologically crucial. The bomber's engineering elegance included redundancy, multiple fuel tanks, fail-safes in systems, and the capacity to route around some damage and still reach home bases. Audio recordings from veterans recount the eerie quiet of long transits before release, the disciplined hum of engines, the concentration of crews, and the strict choreography necessary for night runs. Navigation itself was a skill, dead reckoning over ocean, radio fixes when available, and celestial cues at times, turning pilots into consummate navigators under duress. Ground crews operated under pressure, replacing valves, patching cowlings, and improvising in forward tents. Their stories show the human network behind each sortie. The industrial spectacle was also social. Entire towns employed in assembly lines, women learning riveting and inspection, and communities organized around wartime production. These social histories matter. The B-29's creation was as much a civic mobilization as an engineering feat. Factories, transport, and administrative systems aligned toward a single capability. Enemy perspectives often contain admiration wrapped in alarm. Japanese tactical journals recorded respect for mechanical discipline even while tallying tactical failures. That duality, respect for capacity and horror at consequence, recurs in many post-conflict testimonies and is central to understanding how technology reshapes moral imagination. The bomber's role in atomic delivery complicates any simple narrative of technological pride. It forces historians to weigh capability against human cost and political consequence. Civilian memory from Tokyo includes small domestic items preserved in rubble and letters found in ruins, poignant reminders of ordinary lives intersecting with sweeping technical strategies. Technically oriented historians point to the B-29 as a system, airframe, propulsion, systems control, logistics, and doctrine woven into an operational whole. The bomber's crew composition reflected complexity. Pilots, navigators, flight engineers, gunners, radio operators, each role integral to long missions requiring exact coordination. Survivor testimony often emphasizes the sensory, the smell of smoke, the sound of engines, and the strange juxtaposition of mechanical precision and human devastation. Ethical debates about strategic bombing intensified after the war. Scholars asked whether ends justified means, and whether alternative strategies could have spared civilians. Archives hold official memos, engineers' notes, and maintenance logs that together allow historians to reconstruct how fixes were innovated under pressure. Field improvisation included fabricating baffles, altering fuel pumps, and creating emergency cooling methods, testament to frontline ingenuity. Comparative studies show that when one side imposes technology at scale, the opponent must either innovate, disperse, or accept new vulnerabilities. Japan's responses included dispersal of industry, evacuation orders, and structural adjustments, moves that helped reduce industrial concentration but could not prevent human losses. International observers later recognized the B-29's influence on strategic doctrine. Air power theory incorporated lessons on logistics, altitude, payload, and psychological effects. Veteran memoirs from Allied crews often mix pride and capability with reflections on civilian suffering, signaling a complex legacy for those who flew the missions. Training programs for crews were intensive, simulated long missions, gunnery practice using remote turrets, and navigation exercises tailored to Pacific conditions. The remote turret system required specialized operators and calibration, integrating electromechanical computation and human judgment in a tight loop. Engineers constantly iterated, improved baffling, revised carburetor settings, and redesigned cowling flaps to better manage cylinder temperatures under sustained power. Maintenance manuals expanded rapidly as field experience corrected theoretical assumptions. Manuals became living documents updated by frontline reports. In some forward bases, supply scarcity prompted clever substitutions, repurposed parts, inventive welds, and improvised tools that kept squadrons flying. From a strategic perspective, the B-29's effect was to compress time and space. What once required naval staging and months of maneuver could be struck with remarkable speed. Enemy commanders recorded the psychological impact, the constant hum, the knowledge that any city might feel the sky as a new front, a factor in decision-making and morale. The bomber's production fueled civic changes at home, vocational shifts, women entering industry, and expanded transportation networks to supply plants. These social shifts had long-term effects. Post-war economies integrated wartime industrial skills into peacetime manufacturing and reconstruction efforts. Tactics such as staggered waves, synchronized ignition patterns, and specific incendiary mixes demonstrate the level of applied science behind the raids. Air crews trained to account for wind, timing, and city layout. Their tasks required blending navigation, science, and disciplined execution under fire. Survivor records include fragments of military radio intercepted by civilians, odd auditory traces that became part of the social memory of raids. Analyses of sortie rates show how sustained pressure over time can erode defensive capacity, and that strategic endurance often trumps episodic responses. Academic studies later modeled how firestorm dynamics function when material, wind, and ignition density cross certain thresholds. Applied science explaining human loss. The B-29's era teaches a lesson. When engineering, logistics, and doctrine align, they can create effects beyond what raw numbers of aircraft might suggest. For historians, the bomber is a case study in system thinking. A platform only gains decisive character when allied with support, intelligence, and political will. Letters from Japanese officers reveal pragmatic adaptations, redeploying fighters, dispersing key assets, and accepting certain losses to preserve critical nodes. Some memoirs express grudging admiration for engineers across enemy lines, a recognition that technological skill can elicit respect even amid conflict. The technological ripple extended beyond hardware. Navigation aids, radar developments, and radar countermeasures all accelerated in response. Cold War doctrines later integrated lessons from B-29 operations, the recognition that strategic reach reshapes deterrence and alliance structures. In the archives, factory reports trace assembly times dropping as production processes were refined, an industrial learning curve writ large. Pilot notes emphasize trust in instruments and crew coordination. The Superfortress demanded a culture of disciplined procedure in flight operations. Maintenance crews wrote poetry in their logbooks of a different sort, notes of survival, of parts swapped in the rain, of nights working by kerosene lamp. Public memory diverges. Technical audiences celebrate innovation. Public memory foregrounds human suffering. Both are essential for a full account. The B-29's material culture survives in museums where visitors confront scale and are forced into ambivalence, admiration and reflection, side by side. Engineering students study the Superfortress as a case of ambitious system integration and the hard lessons of thermal management at scale. Oral history projects preserve both crew member pride and civilian testimony, enabling a multi-voiced narrative that refuses single interpretation. Strategists debate whether different doctrines might have achieved similar ends with less civilian harm, counterfactuals that shape ethical warfare debates. Operationally, the bomber validated the idea that technological leadership combined with logistics can yield decisive strategic options. While admiration for craft is natural, the B-29's history compels societies to ask how best to harness innovation and to whom responsibility for consequences belongs. That tension, between marvel and moral reckoning, is why historians return again and again to the Superfortress story. It is never purely technical nor purely human. Standing beneath a preserved wing, one sees rivets and wrench marks and the ghost of crews who navigated risk. The plane becomes a mirror showing capacity and consequence. The final lesson is not a neat moral but a persistent question. How do we channel human ingenuity so it protects life rather than obliterates it? The Superfortress remains a monument to coordinated national effort. Science, factories, logistics, and human labor combine to create a capability of historically vast reach.